Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and great to have so many of you here today. And I'm really glad to see, very familiar faces. And I think we're going to have a great conversation with Professor Kishore Mahbubani. One of the challenges we found, of course, with this theme was that, Kishore approached me and said, we're going to struggle a little bit because it's about corporate governance in a corporate setting. But we wanted to lift this a little bit to a slightly different perspective, a different dimension to building trust. As our guest of honor, Mr. Ravi Menon, has aptly said, building trust is really important for the stability of financial markets and also the success of listed companies. And many of you here are from listed companies, and we're really glad to see, that perspective being shared. But Kishore and I spoke and said we wanted to lift this discussion a little bit more for a slightly different perspective to building trust. And this building trust, as Mark Laudy has aptly said, is about leveraging on your perspectives, Kishore, because you've seen this in the international space and you've seen this around the region as well. And we wanted to add that perspective, that dimension into this whole discussion about building trust, right? So we've got a few more minutes to chat about this topic. And I just wanted to start off with this idea of building trust, Kishore. What does it actually mean when we talk about it from a very high international perspective in the area of geopolitical contestation, and also in terms of how business is rather uncertain in this light?
First of all, thank you. When I got this invitation, I thought they clearly invited the wrong guy. I haven't had any corporate career, as you know. I've been in government and academia. But I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm very happy to congratulate Ravi Menon on his outstanding award, which, as you all know, is very well deserved for his many years of service. Now, on the question of trust, I think trust operates at many, many different levels, as you know. It operates at the individual level, at the family level, at society level, at the corporate level, but it also operates at the regional and global levels. And if you want to identify the biggest challenge that Singapore companies will face over the next 10 years, is very easy to identify, which is going to be the breakdown of geopolitical trust between the United States and China, right? Relations between the United States and China will get worse. And you all know that various steps have been taken by the United States to try and stop China's growth. I mean, I'm not giving these secrets away. Trump announced the trade tariffs to slow down Chinese economy. Then Biden announced the CHIPS Act, right? And then now you're going to see other measures to restrain investment in China in sensitive industries. Now, the reason I mention all this is that while these measures are intended against China, there are lots of Singapore companies who do business in the United States and do business in China. And in the past, it was an easy path to navigate, right? Because there were no fundamental differences. But as the differences between US and China accentuate, and as we try to do business with both, we're going to get caught in the crossfire. So I think the one thing that companies have to be aware of over the next 10 years is, as you go to these markets, be careful what the regulations are, and in the case, by the way, of US and China, since you said the focus is on building trust, I expect that there'll be very little building of trust between two parties. If one party is out to bring the other party down, that's the goal. How do you build trust? So you have to learn to live with high levels of distrust between US and China, and it'll be a difficult environment, therefore, for Singapore. But I'm also going to say, when maybe we move on to regional level, there are some protections you can develop.
So maybe before we do that, just expand on that idea of living in a world of distrust, especially with this rivalry between two, should we say, superpowers at this time, economic superpowers. What do you reckon companies should be doing in terms of trying to understand, the waves of distrust, if you like?
Well, I think any company that has a global business or even regional East Asian business has got to be aware of all the regulations that are coming. So, for example, let's say if you're exporting chips to China, You got to be very, very sure that whatever inputs you put into your chips, right? If you have American inputs, be absolutely certain that you're not violating inadvertently some sanctions that are going to be applied on China. So this will make life in some ways difficult, and also there will also be financial transactions that could also affect you. I mean, I give you a simple and obvious example. In the case of Hong Kong, some individuals have been sanctioned. As you know, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, the current chief executive, John, they have executive. So if by chance you make a payment to these people, be careful. You may end up being sanctioned because you transferred money to a sanctioned individual under U.S. Legislation. So you can get caught in the crossfire on all kinds of things.
I would accept that perhaps the politics would guide a lot of the discussions between the U.S. and China. But in your view, do you think there's some light at the end of the tunnel where something will develop that's positive in terms of the trust or the lack of trust, for that matter?
Well, the one lesson I must say I learned from working with our founding fathers, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam, is that the most dangerous thing to do in geopolitics is to engage in wishful thinking. It's very dangerous. And unfortunately, geopolitics, as you all know, is a very dirty game. And and now, as you know, it's actually getting much worse, because when things break down in geopolitics, the consequence are wars. You have the Ukraine war, you have the Gaza war. These are all results of breakdown of geopolitical trust. Okay, and so that's why we have to be very careful. And I think it's important on the U.S.-China front just to be ready for things to get more difficult. Now, if you ask me whether there's light at the end of the tunnel, I say the one thing that we do have is that the biggest protection Singapore can develop in terms of not being caught up in this crossfire between US and China is to build a buffer. And the best buffer is ASEAN. Now, ASEAN is big enough. Singapore has got, 4 to 5 million people. ASEAN is 650 million people. And ASEAN combined can be a buffer from all kinds of pressures that are happening. And fortunately, there's a common interest among the 10 ASEAN countries who don't want to get caught in the crossfire. And most of them want to have good ties with the United States, and they want to have good ties with China. And so if we all combine together, then we can fob off some of the demands that are coming our way. So
I'm glad you sort of talk about ASEAN, because that's a good segue to talk about the region, right? So in the context of building trust, how do you think things are likely to play out, given that, of course, trust in a way was severely tested in more recent times in ASEAN over the Myanmar issue, but at the same time, as you say, there's a lot of goodwill in terms of building that trust around the region. But as you know, ASEAN, of course, has this whole long-standing policy of consultation and consensus, trying to reach agreement on, sensitive matters and so on and so forth. How do you think the whole concept of building trust is likely to play out within the ASEAN Southeast Asian region?
Yeah. Well, since I'm giving you all lots of bad news, let me give you some good news for a change. The good news is that ASEAN has developed deep reservoirs of trust within the community. And I want to emphasize that this is a result of 52 years of work. Because when I first attended my first ASEAN meeting, actually it was 52 years ago, in 1971, when I joined the Singapore Foreign Service. And the ASEAN meeting would be held in a room about this size, and then there would be, the head of delegation and his officials behind him. And when you walk in the room in 1971, the amount of distrust among the ASEAN countries was phenomenal. Now, Malaysia and Singapore distrusted each other because they just had a painful separation. Indonesia and Malaysia distrusted each other because they had had a confrontasi. Thailand and Malaysia distrusted each other because Thailand believed that Malaysia was supporting separatists in southern Thailand. Philippines and Malaysia distrusted each other because Philippines was claiming Sabah, the whole state, from Malaysia. So you can see that there was a very fractious, difficult environment in 1971. But I can tell you that having attended meetings in the 70s, and you could smell the distrust as soon as you walk into the room. When I became the permanent secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1994, and I began to attend ASEAN meetings as what they call the senior official leader, SOM leader, the distrust had evaporated. I mean, it's quite a stunning phenomenon to go into the same meeting, same ASEAN countries, but 20 years of hard work had resulted in sort of reservoirs of trust and goodwill, which, by the way, still exists today. And that's a remarkable asset. And you know, again, all of us in this room, I don't understand why you do this, but you all take for granted that there'll be no war in Southeast Asia, right? Unlike Gaza, unlike Ukraine, right? You think that, why do you think the prospects of war are so low in this region? It's because of this amazing decades of work on ASEAN. And because it's invisible, you can't see it. But at the same time, if it wasn't there, believe me, all your corporate plans will have to factor in conflicts in Southeast Asia, which as of now are low to zero. By the way, on a side note, you mentioned Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is obviously a problem for ASEAN, but we mustn't get distracted by Myanmar. In every organization, you have some problems. We have to park Myanmar aside, carry on with the rest of ASEAN. And the rest of ASEAN, by the way, is growing phenomenally. Now, let me give you all one statistic so you understand how well ASEAN has grown. In the year 2000, Japan was the second largest economy in the world, right? 2000. Japan's economy was 8 times the size of ASEAN's economy in the year 2000. But by 2022, Japan is only 1.5 times bigger. And by 2030, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan, which was the second largest economy in the world. So that's ASEAN's growth that's been completely underestimated by the world.
So obviously, to estimate where the growth is going to go, you've had all the economic projections to show that there is a lot of growth prospect going forward for ASEAN. But still on the theme about building trust, I know you mentioned that the level of distrust has completely evaporated maybe 20, 30 years ago. But going forward from this point, where do you think this whole idea of building trust is going to head for ASEAN?
Well, I think the important thing for ASEAN to do to ensure it keeps growing is that it's got to now build trust with all its partners, right? And, I can tell you, by the way, when I attended ASEAN meetings in the 1980s, if you ever suggested a free trade agreement among ASEAN countries, the Indonesians and Malaysians would immediately say, there is greedy Singapore. Greedy Singapore wants to grab our markets. There's no way we'll give a free trade agreement to Singapore. Guess what? We accomplished it. We got a free trade agreement. And the net result of it is that others then also join in the game. And so the trade, ASEAN's trade with the world has exploded, I must tell you this. Let me give you another statistic, okay? Again, the year 2000, ASEAN's trade with the US was $135 billion. ASEAN's trade with China was $40 billion. 135 US, 40 China. By 2022, ASEAN's trade with the US had gone up significantly from 135 to 440 billion. And ASEAN's trade with China had grown from 40 billion to $975 billion. That's the world's largest trading relationship, larger than the United States and EU. What drives this? It's trust. As I think Ravi hinted at some point, quoting someone, every time you have a transaction, there's trust in that transaction. And the fact that ASEAN has been able to build these phenomenal trading relationships, by the way, is also one reason why the Singapore economy is doing so well. We have the highest level of trade dependency of any country anywhere in the world. Our total trade is 3.5 to 3.5 times size of our GNP. No other country comes close. Now imagine if you didn't have this ASEAN ecosystem of trust facilitating this incredible growth in trade, Singapore wouldn't be prospering.
Well, talking about Singapore, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left to the session. I just want to get a quick thought from you in
Thank
relation
you
to
very
Singapore.
much for making it a 20-minute session. I'm very grateful to you.
The organizers have planned for the 20-minute session, so we will sort of use that time to talk a little bit about Singapore and that whole idea about building trust. I just want to get your sense as to where you think this idea about building trust in this country is going to go.
Well, I think Singapore, I must say, is an exceptional country. I don't know of any other country. You know, when Singapore became independent in 1965, our per capita income was $500, the same as Ghana. Today, we are among the top 5 in the world at 74,000, 77,000. I don't know what the latest figures are. We have grown dramatically. Now, the problem about exceptional success, and this is true of companies also, if companies have exceptional success and countries have exceptional success, it's very hard to keep replicating it, right? And it's especially hard if you keep on doing the same old thing as you did before. So just as companies have to reinvent themselves after periods of exceptional success, because then, you know, you've seen how very, very successful companies disappear. When I grew up as a child, Kodak, I thought, was one of the best companies in the world. Where's Kodak today? Gone, right? So the companies come, companies go, they stick to their same old formulas. So in the case of Singapore, clearly the biggest challenge is that to maintain this exceptional record, we also have to reinvent ourselves at some stages in one way or another and find new ways of getting exceptional growth.
Well, that reinvention is an ongoing job, as we've been hearing from our political leaders. So, Professor, in about a minute or so, if I were to ask you for one key takeaway that you'd like to leave our audience with today on this whole idea of the theme of building trust, I know it's about effective corporate governance, but let's talk about building trust in general. What is that one thought you'll leave our audience with today?
Well, I think Ronald Reagan had a wonderful expression. He said when he was dealing with the Soviet Union, he said, trust, but verify. So, you know, in a sense, that's also what Lee Kuan Yew used to say. One of his favorite expressions, he says, I always check, I double check, I triple check, and then I check again. This was the Lee Kuan Yew rule, okay? But I can tell you in my case, unfortunately, I wish I had heeded that, because I'm going to tell you a very personal story so you understand why trust is so important. I was recently asked given an investment product from a very good company. I trust the company then, I trust it now. It's called Manulife, an insurance company. They offered me a REIT, United States REIT, R-E-I-T, a few years ago. I invested $200,000 in it. As of today, I have lost 94%. So I trusted, but I didn't verify. Next time, trust and verify.
So in other words, he says, do not trust, trust only when you know. Professor Kishore Bambubani, thank you very much indeed. Please join me with a round of applause for Kishore. Thank you very much.